Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GameSpace Game Show. I am Chris, and with me today is Dame. Hello, Dame.
Hey, Chris, it's good to see you, buddy. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay, a little better now. I was sick for most of today, so if you see me looking away from my screen a little bit, it's because the blue light is killing my eyes, and that I have my gamer glasses. They looked a little too silly to wear in a stream. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Vanity, vanity.
Yes, that's what it is. And well, the other part of it also though is that we have a little bit more of a serious show today.
True.
And I felt a little bit like wearing my zebra striped racing glasses would undermine a little bit about what we're after today.
Probably,
Right?
probably. Unless you wanted to be the zebra and I was the lion. I don't know. I mean, we could go with that. But yeah, we've got just kind of on the front end of the stream here. If you're just tuning in with us, we're so grateful you're joining the stream. We've got a little bit of a heavier topic that we're going to talk about here tonight. Not to steal the hosting here from you, Chris, but we're going to talk a little bit about video games and violence here tonight.
Right. And I was thinking, like, throughout today, like, in my sick haze of, like, appropriate titles and things like that. But ultimately, why we're duoing tonight is I think you and I have a unique perspective, I guess, just by virtue of what we do for a living. So,
Yes.
What do you do for a living?
So I am a pastor, and I have been a pastor for about 13 years now. And a majority of that time in ministry has been spent working with middle school and high school students. And so the topic, especially of violence and video games and influence in media and stuff like that, has been a huge part of the conversation along those years of ministry.
For sure, and me as well. I'm a third grade teacher right now, so I teach the little guys. But being in the world of education, my life is largely about kids. So we have, on one hand, a life dedicated to children. On the other hand, the things we do with gaming and writing and all that kind of stuff. And it's I don't know. I've always felt it's an interesting dichotomy of holding these two things because I don't want to get too far into it yet because we have a disclaimer, but I feel like there is an expectation placed on me as a teacher to be somewhat anti-video game.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm not sure if you've ever felt that way in your position. Have you ever felt that way?
Oh, I can totally speak to that, and I think I've shared that on the stream here before. Growing up in the church and also, spending my education in Bible college and stuff like that, where actually a bunch of my friends played video games together. I made some great friendships over couch co-op Halo and Diablo 2, surprisingly, in Bible college. But yeah, I mean, I ran into especially in the late 90s. The big stigmas surrounding like Pokemon and Doom and stuff like that. So definitely have experienced that. And then also, professionally as a pastor, I kind of live in this fishbowl world where everything is under scrutiny. So yeah, I'm not immune to that either.
Right. So before we get into it, I have a disclaimer I'm supposed to read because we really don't know where this podcast is going to go tonight, and it deals with some heavier topics. So the views that we are going to share on this video aren't necessarily representation of GameSpace or MMORPG or any of the affiliated sites or streamers that are out there. These are our opinions. And I don't know about you, Dame, but I was really looking forward to having this conversation with you because I feel like, I don't know, I've just had these things within me that I've wondered about with my perspectives. I'm really curious to get your take on things. So, as most people out there will have heard at this point, there was a terrible shooting at a school down in Florida. Lots of kids are dead, and once again, video games are kind of being brought up as one of the possible causes of this. The question right now, the debate, is if there's merit to that. And without weighing in yet, I think even if you're a dedicated game player, it's a question that needs to be asked because games are just gratuitously violent, some of them. They're just terribly, terribly violent. And if you're not a gamer, it's very easy to look at video gaming and see all of the negative qualities about it. So have you had any of these discussions surrounding video game violence in your pastoral position?
Absolutely. One of the things that I find especially is that as I talk with parents more specifically, and one of the neat things about the role that I find myself in right now as being both an assistant pastor and also a writer for MMORPG and GameSpace is that I have this really unique and I've had a lot of parents ask me questions, especially around Christmas time. You know, their kids have the list of these are the games that I'm looking at, these are the games that I want, and I've had like at least a half a dozen parents come to me and say, okay, here are the kids that my games are, or here are the kids my games are looking at. Here are the games my kids are looking at. What do you think of these things? And so, you know, there are some interesting conversations that have kind of come out of that. And then there's also an interesting history piece in my history as an individual, in that I also worked in a nameless toy hustling cartel that happened to sell video games, and so I had many interactions with parents buying games for their kids. I have kind of a funny anecdote with that if we have time for that, but
sure, go ahead.
Okay, so it was right around the time that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas came out, and it was also around Christmas time, and I had this about 11-year-old kid that came up to the security office where we held all of the video games at, with I believe it was his mother, to acquire this game, and he hands me the slip of paper. And Mom is just like, oh, you know, I'm doing something nice for my son and stuff like that. And so I look at the paper, I look at the kid, I look at the mom, and so I just, you know, casually just say, you know, hey, are you familiar with the ERSB rating system by any chance? And she's like, no, what is that? I'm like, oh, hey, we had this poster. And so it's like, oh, hey, we've got this great system, you know, that you know, the video game community works with. I believe this was before the PEGI rating system was in place too. But I kind of walked her down like, you know, hey, this is E, this is T, this is M, and these are all the categories that fall in, and you can look here and see like why these games are rated this way. And so I pull out the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas case, and I flip it around, and I show the mom, okay, so it's rated M for mature for strong language, for you know, graphic violence, for sexual content and stuff like that. And like as I'm going down this list, like I'm just seeing like just this kindling like fire in her eyes, and then I look down to the kid, and he's just like, I'm gonna murder you in your sleep. Like, don't do it, don't rat me out. And so like as soon as like I finish the list, she looks down at her son, and she's just like, young man, you and I are going to have a very long car ride home.
Look what you did to that kid.
I ruined Christmas for him. I was okay with that, but yeah.
Well, I feel like there's a responsibility there, and thank goodness that
absolutely.
Thank goodness that you were willing to do that, and the mom was willing to listen, because one of the things that I see a lot is kids will come in. Now, I'm dealing with 8-year-olds when they come into me. These kids are well-versed in Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty and all of these other things that they have no business playing at their age. And it's because the parents either don't know what the kids are playing, or maybe just don't care. I think that's the case for some of them. And honestly, as a teacher, it bothers me to have my kids coming in and talking about Call of Duty.
Well, my wife is an educator as well, and an elementary educator. And one of the things, and she's also a gamer as well, and so one of the things that has always been troublesome to her has been to see, like, you know, first graders, first, second, third graders walking into her classroom. She's an art teacher, walking into her classroom with like Five Nights at Freddy's regalia on and stuff like that. And now, you know, again, you know, Freddy's franchise, for those who love them, they love the games, but I mean, when you package a really dark story in animatronics and in like bright colors, like that, there are some kind of warning signs that kind of go on there. And fortunately, I mean, she knows enough about the game stuff to be able to say, hey guys, you know, are these the best conversations that we can be having right now?
Does it hurt kids to play that stuff though? Do you think?
Does it hurt kids to play stuff like that? What I'm going to suggest here, and this kind of gets us into the main topic of conversation, when it comes to the question of do video games cause us to be violent? Does it cause violence in real life? I think it's the issue, but it's not the issue. I think that any type of media, and I think that we'd be foolish to suggest otherwise. Any type of media has influence over us. Mm-hmm. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. I mean, that's kind of what art does, right? Like, good art should move us. Good art should take us into a different place than we were before we had that experience. But then you have to look at what are the experiences that we're having in those things. And when you are a 7, 8, 9-year-old experiencing highly graphic content, I think that it would be very foolish for us not to consider what type of influence that may have in the long term. Now, I say that, but I also say that as somebody who also grew up playing games like Doom and Quake and Duke Nukem 3D and stuff like that. So the catalog of games that I grew up with, mostly unbeknownst to my parents at the time, were probably more of the violent of their kind at that point in time. But getting back into the thing but not the thing, I think that there are other characteristics at play other than simply exposure to violent content.
Yes, what you were saying is how you had played Doom and things like that when you were a kid. I mean, so did I. I played those kinds of things, but there's a certain danger in assuming that everyone is going to handle that kind of stuff the same way.
Yes.
I mean, for example, in teaching, most people think they know what it's like to be a teacher because we've all had hands-on time with teachers. We've all gone through the schooling process. But once you're on the other side of it, you realize there's a whole lot more that you don't see. You get that different perspective. So when we have kids that are growing up, they're playing games, if there's something else going on with them, like poverty,
yes. Oh, absolutely.
Exposure to other kinds of violent media, anxiety, depression, these are all things that kids face, and they were things that I didn't have to face, and I'm very grateful for that. But it's easy to see once you get that kind of wider picture of the kids out there that, well, for Billy, who his dad left him when he was 8 and his mom is dating an alcoholic that likes to beat the family, that playing a game like Gears of War where you're attacking somebody with a chainsaw in gory fashion might have a little bit different of a meaning. And that might seem like an extreme scenario, but I tell you what, anybody who works with kids, that is not an extreme scenario.
And I'm really glad that you brought up this point, because this is really, really important in framing this entire conversation in. One of the, and this is something that having worked with teenagers for as long as I did, and not just, and I've got to be careful in saying this, because I am not an expert, okay? Just because I've had that experience working with teenagers and middle schoolers, I do not claim to be an authority. But what I can tell you from a researched authoritative standpoint is that fatherlessness is actually a key factor in exponentially more violent behavior in kids. There's actually a research study that was done by it was the National this is a crazy name, National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health. It explored the relationship between family structure and risk of violent acts in their neighborhoods. And this is what they discovered. They discovered that that when the percentage of single-parent homes increased by 1%, and when I say single-parent homes, it typically means that it's mom raising the kid. The percentage of single fathers raising child are much lower. But with 1% increase in single-parent homes, there was a 3% increase at the level of adolescent violence within the neighborhood. And I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's one of those things that, when we look at this whole picture, video games is just one element of this entire conversation. It's
Right.
the thing, but it's not the thing. And so anyway, I don't want to get too far out in the weeds, but I did want to say that I really appreciate you bringing that up.
No, that's something that I've actually looked into too. When I was working on my master's degree, one of the studies that I was working on my thesis, and a lot of that was about growing up in a separated household. I grew up with my dad and things like that, and I did a lot of research on the impact of single-parent households at that point. And it does spiral out into things like behavioral outcomes like that, and many other things. But I could see critics of this kind of viewpoint would say, well, are we supposed to change everything for a minority of people? Which is fair. I think that's fair. But I think really the heart of concern from at least from my perspective here is not so much that I think my students are all going to go and do something terrible in their lives. I think the vast majority of them will probably be just fine, honestly. But it's the ones where there's something else going on, where there's a desensitization to horrible things. And it's not just video games. You know, one of the things that bothers me most is scary movies. You know, in the last 3 years, I've had to explain well, they've wanted me to explain graphic sexual stuff, which I absolutely will not do, but they want to know, Mr. Coke, what is decapitation? What is cannibalism? Or, things where they're pretending to cut each other with toy knives and things because they saw that. There was a girl in my first year teaching. This happened before I had come on. This was in second grade, but they had watched some scary movie. I forget what exactly it was, but she had her friends convinced that they should go down to this pond in the middle of the night because there was a ghost down there that was going to kill their families. And this is a girl that would believe that, and she would also relish the fact of sharing that with other kids. So it's also not so much just the impact on one kid, but as a parent, when I consider sending my kids into school, it bleeds out onto the other kids. The one student who doesn't handle it well, it bleeds out on the other ones.
Well, and that's been one of those things that's been an observation, not just in a church setting for me, but also like watching, my wife's classroom setting, because I'll go into the school to volunteer. But one of the things that we've seen is how one kid that is living out that fantasy, or that living out that thing that they saw, can disrupt an entire classroom. Like the number of times, and again, like bringing it back to like the Five Nights at Freddy's thing, like there have been a number of times where like Bailey's overheard, kids say, hey, let's play Five Nights at Freddy's, and she's like, yeah, this probably isn't your best decision right now. Like, yeah, which one of you is going to be the spring trap? Come on. But Chris, I think that there's an interesting transition point in our conversation here, because we can talk about all of the problems, and we can talk about the observations that we've made. And one of the major questions that's really within our cultural consciousness right now is, what do we do about it? Because we have these conversations that are coming from legislators that are saying, hey, we really need to, we need to regulate games, and we need to regulate violent movies. And I've got a take on that. That's not a popular opinion.
Okay.
And my take on that is you can't legislate evil out of the heart of a person.
That's good. That's good.
You can't do that. I mean, just the same way that you can't legislate kindness. Like, if the law forces me to be kind to you, that's not kindness. That's coercion. And so there's something that is at the very root and the very heart of us as people that we really need to take a look at before we start looking at the thing that's not really the thing.
Right.
And before I get too far out into the weeds of the pastoral end of this, like one of the things that, and maybe let me just throw this back to you here, Chris. Like in your opinion, as you take a look at some of the issues that are going on surrounding this as a teacher, like how do you handle those situations where you have kids that are bringing content into the classroom that, from an age standpoint, just probably isn't the greatest for them to be bringing into the classroom?
So the biggest thing that I see in my room is Five Nights at Freddy's right now.
Okay.
This year, that is the thing. And honestly, they all know what it is.
Yep.
So I would prefer it not be there. And I like they have all these plushies and toys, and
Yep.
it's very very differentiated for how the kids bring that in. But I just make them keep it put away. And if they start to talk about kind of the darker aspects of it, like I put an end to that immediately. But there are certain things that once they transition to a certain point, you can't really put a lid on it. And Five Nights at Freddy's with at least our school is one of them. They all know about it. It's not going to disappear.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I have to constantly be vigilant because these kids are bringing that stuff in. At any point, they could wind up sharing something that would be inappropriate. And a part of what I feel my position is as a teacher, not only to educate the kids, but also to protect them in certain ways.
Sure.
Because we have families that come in, they have all these different values. Where one family might be okay with watching a horror movie, another would say you're much too young. You're not going to watch it till you're a teenager. So it's kind of navigating these different value systems to
Absolutely.
protect the kids who need protection, keep all of the kids being appropriate for the situation that they're in, and to make sure that they understand that it's make-believe. Because one of the things with younger kids is they can start to blend those lines a little
Yes.
bit. And it doesn't necessarily mean they think there's an animatronic in the closet, but it could translate through to now I'm having nightmares.
Sure.
Or, now I'm having these issues at home and I want to engage with this really dark content as a result of it. I guess for me, it comes down to emotional support for all the kids.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that about, kind of living out that kind of fantasy like that. And I know fantasy is probably the wrong word to use, but that fixation, I guess, on the source material. In Wisconsin here, we had, and I'm sure that you heard about it in New York, we had a couple of girls that ended up murdering one of their friend, convinced that the Slender Man told them to do it.
Yeah.
And these are children. These are children that have been kind of stewing on this thing and obsessing over this thing that cost them the lives of one of their friends. That's a hard thing to come back from.
Yeah.
A couple of the things that have been really big and helpful tools for me have been two things really that have helped me guide some of these conversations, because I think that it's really important, whether it's third graders or 13-year-olds or even 30-year-olds, or asking some really good questions about why we engage in the material that we do, or why we find entertainment within the things that we do, and specifically when dealing with kids. I heard somebody say this a couple of years ago, and I had to look up the quote here earlier today, but the quote came from a guy by the name of Mark Ostricher, and I'm sure I'm butchering his last name. But in talking about middle school students, he said that a middle schooler will gravitate to the oldest person that takes them seriously. Now, let's talk about this from the standpoint of video games here. When was and maybe you're the exception here, because I know that you have kids, and I don't know what your philosophy is with your kids and video games just yet, or if you're still trying to navigate that. But do you remember, as a kid, did you have a forum of conversation with an older person about video games?
No. However, I think it's a fundamentally different world.
Absolutely,
I mean,
yes.
when we were growing up, even the games that we were playing back then were nothing. I mean, you could take Doom compared to even a mildly violent game, and just the fidelity of games has come up so much. It's way more realistic.
Yeah.
Way more realistic. So I don't know. I think the desensitization that happens is way more likely to happen now than it was back then. And one of the key games with that, I think, is Call of Duty. Now, disclosure, I actually enjoy Call of Duty. I like these shooters. But the Army used to train people to kill by having them shoot people-shaped targets, because it makes you a little more desensitized to the idea of shooting a person. So I think these are conversations parents need to have.
Absolutely.
In all honesty, I don't think many parents are very interested in having them. At least in, that's my anecdotal experience. I mean, I hope that's not the case across the board, but that's certainly been what I've experienced is the kids who are talking about video games, 9 times out of 10, they're talking about games they should not be playing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've found as well is that parents that and then here's the other thing too with that. Sorry, parents that do want to have those conversations often feel unarmed in having those conversations, and then you've got parents on the other side of the pendulum that don't want to have those conversations. I was actually very fortunate as a kid. I grew up with both of my parents. And my mom would sit and listen to me prattle on about stuff that she didn't understand at all. Like I'm sitting here like expounding on the plot of Final Fantasy VII, and she's going, "Yeah, okay, that's great. I'm glad you're enjoying." But having that person in my life that I could that took me seriously, like when I was younger. To be able to say, okay, I see that this thing is important to you. I may not understand it, and she did try. Like she tried. But having people that, whether it's a parent or whether it's a mentor, whether it's a teacher, having people in their life that care enough to come alongside and have those conversations is so vital. Culture is kind of like a stew, right? Like we often kind of take in like what's surrounding us, and especially with the formative years being elementary, middle school, high school. Those are such important times for kids to be able to have adults that care about them, that come alongside of them to be able to mentor them through how to make wise decisions within. And I'm actually going to give you a tool for that here too.
Okay.
So here is the tool. This comes from a dude. His name is Walt Mueller. He runs an organization called the Center for Parent and Youth Understanding, and he has this thing called the 3D approach, where it's any type of media, any type of content, whether it's video games, movies, music. It's a 3-tier approach of discover, discern, and decide. With the discovery phase, it's a matter of taking a look at like, okay, what are the themes? What is the content? What is the way that this is presented? Like with something like violence. I mean, here's the thing, like there are some justifiable times for violence, right? Like if my wife is being attacked and I am in the home, my inaction is evil at that point if I do not step up and protect my wife.
Right.
So there are moments where there's justifiable violence and anyway, sorry, I won't get into that too much here. But I think there's an importance of helping kids to discern, like, okay, let's have a framework for this. Like, how is this thing painted? Is it something like a Grand Theft Auto, and I hate going to GTA all the time because I feel like it's the constant dumping ground for this, but like a Call of Duty or something like that, where okay, maybe violence is a little bit more glorified. Like, okay, so that's the value that's being presented by this medium. Okay, then there's the discernment process where you have to take a look at what are my values. Okay, so for me as a pastor, I would say, as a Christian, what does my worldview say about this thing? Like, how does it frame the context of this thing? And then how do those things kind of look next to each other? And then I have to decide, okay, now that I have this information, what do I do with it? How do I have a conversation about this thing? How do I move forward with it? And that type of conversation is far better than just simply panning something and ignoring it.
Right. Yeah, and you're exactly right, because the heart of all of this is that most kids exposed to this kind of media are going to wind up being okay because they have other value systems around them that will overcome the impact of the media. But when you have mental illness, that's a part of that, and these other outside factors, that's where we have these troubles happening. So having people to speak into your life and being able to discern, and like all these things are just so important. Like that is how you prevent these kinds of tragedies in the future. Zarthanium, I'm pronouncing your name right, said, kids all over the world play violent games, but America's the only one with the shootings and stuff. Some things different between USA and those other places, but top thing is how easy it is to get guns here than it is over there, which is another thing. And I don't think we need to go into the big gun debate, but we're in a somewhat more unique situation over here because we have incidences of mental illness that may not be able to be covered for, your insurances and things like that, especially for people in poverty. And then you have easy access to weaponry, and you have systems where, like in a school system, I'm not sure if Bailey's ever talked with you about this, but there are times when you just feel like your hands are tied.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
like, one of the things that is a struggle for me is I can have a really good idea that something is going on, and like say bullying, okay?
Yeah.
And I can follow up on that, and I will follow up on that. As someone who was bullied as a kid, I want that has no place in my classroom.
Sure.
But at a certain point, everything gets run up the chain, right? So then when it gets handed up and it's taken out of your hands, you feel like sometimes that things that you're just the power is stripped from you to make that kind of impact. So when you have like situations where people's hands are tied, where there probably is mental illness in cases, like obviously there's mental illness in cases where you're a school shooter, but then home situations and all that, games are a symptom. Like I think playing.
I think it's also. I think it's also kind of dangerous to just. I hate to step on here, though, Chris, but I think it is dangerous to frame mental illness as kind of a big factor within this. I think I don't want to discount its place in some of these situations. Like there are some very sick states of mind that you have to be in to get into a place like that. But I think that just blanketly saying that mental illness is one of the sole causes of this, and I don't think that's what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What the point I'm getting at is it's not just mental illness. It's not just video games. It's not any one thing. What we see is a lot of things that are symptomatic, I think, of deeper heart issues.
Yes, absolutely.
Like you said, you can't legislate the evil out of a man, right? But in so many things, by the time it hits the media, what the media is looking for is a simple answer. Right, so when they present these things, we get video games being the scapegoat because you have people that are on the outside and they can see these violent games like, oh, well, that's why kids are violent. Or you can do that with any number of different problems in society where you can find a face for the problem and try to simplify things down to one issue, and it's never that simple.
Well, I think it's also twofold, that it's both simplification and salation. I mean, let's be honest. As American news consumers, we really like salacious news, and so when you can conflate things, and I am not a conspiracy theorist, so please don't put that out there if you're watching here. But I mean, when I look at I would really encourage everyone, when you look at news. When you look at news sites, when you look at things that are framing around this conversation, look at sources. One of the things that I really appreciated about what Stephen did in writing the article on GameSpace about video games and violence is that he sourced a lot of his material. You'll see that there are some very legitimate sources within that. There is one piece of information that I would argue with a little bit in there, but we don't have time to talk about that today.
So anyone who wants to find that, by the way, the article is called "Video Games Are to Blame. Do Video Games Cause Violence?" And I agree, it's a very well-sourced article. There's a lot that's in there. And what I appreciate here is the sourcing. Like we were talking before the show a little bit about, I'm not sure how a gaming audience really looks at that, but when you actually go into sources, it helps you to cut through a little bit of the sense. I want to say like the sensationalizing that goes on out there. Like you get down to the facts. Now, the sad state of society today is most people do not want to take the time to read a study. They don't want to take the time to read an abstract to a study, and most people, I don't think, know what an abstract to a study is. Not to be too negative, but I think it's necessary for people to cut through the media to a degree to try to get to the
Yes.
heart of facts if we want to evoke change. But so many things with that are just, they make it so difficult to do. Trump last week had a quote here. He said, we have to look at the internet because a lot of bad things are happening to young kids and young minds, and their minds are being formed, and we have to do something about, this is horrible, have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it. And also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence in video games is really shaping young people's minds. And then you have to go a step further, and that's the movies. You see these movies and they're so violent, and yet a kid is able to see the movie if sex isn't involved, but killing is involved. Now there are pieces of that are true, but that's like part and parcel of, here are three key things to blame: internet, video games, and movies. How about, like you and I mentioned previously, family systems?
Sure.
That's a lot
Absolutely.
harder for a politician to be able to fix. How about poverty? That's harder for a family to fix. And like video games, a parent who wants to keep their kid happy but doesn't necessarily have the money to take them out to Chuck E. Cheese or other fun kind of things like that, a video game is a longer term solution.
Sure.
That will
Yep.
win points with
Yep.
their kids. So like you're seeing these things being offered up even in parent-child relationships as solutions, as stopgaps to relationship building in places. So my point in all of this is just to say it is so complicated, and any time we're going to try to simplify it down to a handful of things is going to fail. That is impossible to do. So I did want to ask you something though, because we only have a short amount of time. I mentioned before the show that I feel like, or maybe it was in the beginning of the show, but I feel like as a teacher, I'm supposed to have more of a negative view of video games. So, and I know as a pastor, we play violent games. This is just one of the things that we do by virtue of writing on this site. I mean, how do you reconcile those things within yourself? Like, you have this faith system, you have these values, you have these morals, and then engaging with media that, from an outsider's perspective, may completely fly in the face of what your value system is.
Sure. Sure. How do I reconcile that? Well, I think that one of the things that's really important is looking at the media for what it is. I talked a little bit earlier about video games as an art form. It really is a new medium of storytelling. Like, it's the new movie or the new comic book or even literature. And so I have to look at it and evaluate it from the same point of view. For me personally, like, I actually use the 3D approach that I talked about, with Walt Mueller. I have to look at those things, and a prime example of this really is, and one of the things that we'll get into here if we've got a couple of minutes here at the end is, I just came back from the Far Cry 5 a preview event, and wrote about it on GameSpace, an MMORPG, and it's a very violent game, and a lot of the theming surrounds cultic activity. Now, one of the things that I've heard, people, rabble about with this particular game is like, oh my word, I can't believe they're painting Christians like this. And I have to take a step back from that and ask the question of, okay, why? Why is it painted like this? Does the setting make sense? Does the story make sense if you were to strip away some of those elements? I don't know that it would. And so like, within the context of some of these things, I would say, like, I try to evaluate those things, and I have certain criteria for games that I will and will not play. So I'm not a I will play all of the things. There's actually there's a piece of scripture that I tend to go to, that tends to be my go-to whenever I'm making a decision like this, and it's in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and it says, everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial, and everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. And so for me, I have to ask those questions of like, is this something that's going to have mastery over me emotionally? Is it going to have something that's going to have mastery over me, like, mentally? Like, am I going to obsess about this thing? And is it going to enhance me? Should, as art does, will it put me in a better place after I'm done with this experience, or will it put me in a worse place? And I have to weigh those things for myself, just like everyone else does.
Right, and that's really close to where I fall also. I mean, at this point, we're also past the age range where, we can see this for what it is, right? I think that's important, engaging with this
Yes.
kind of content, we're grown men at this point. But I think in my position, when I'm looking at video games, violence is often a part of them, but that's not necessarily the reason why I'm going to play any game. I mean, you
Right.
can play a horrible game that's extremely violent, but what I am always looking for in the world of games are things that will make me feel something, and that's the case
Yes.
for any media. Like my favorite genre of fiction is horror and like new weird, right? And it's those are often very darkly themed things, but the two are related because what I am really after are number one storytelling. That is why I
Yes.
am a gamer for me. But then there's also the gameplay element of the games I play. Call of Duty, for example, may be gratuitously violent, but at a certain point, it's you detach from it purely because it's so unrealistic in at least
Sure.
the multiplayer part of it. So there's the gameplay part. And I explained it to Becky. It feels a lot more like playing like paintball, honestly,
Yeah.
than anything like
Yeah.
realistic. So I guess, where I tend to fall on that is, what I encourage in my students are things that are appropriate for them, because I think to engage with this kind of media takes a level of maturity and a level of experience and worldview uh, to be able to get the most from it. And that's not to say that, you or I have anything different than anybody else. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that as a kid growing up, you're so mutable in who you are,
Yes.
and your
Absolutely.
experiences are so limited. There's a whole culture in a high school that is your life at that point. Then when you're engaging with this kind of stuff, it is much easier to internalize the bad without giving credence to the good that's there.
Yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
And I want to make a point on that because this entire conversation, I this is a deeply personal conversation for me, and I say that from the standpoint, and I've had to try to be a little bit less emotive, and try to stick to the conversation here, but on the flip side of what you're saying there about about kind of taking those things and thinking about like the good and the bad and stuff like that. Not to be over dramatic here, but I am the product of a school shooting. I remember distinctly April 20th, 1999, watching my peers run out of the Columbine High School. Now, I did not attend that high school, okay? I did not even live in Colorado, but I am in Pennsylvania watching on the news this thing
Yeah.
unfolding. And as a teenager, this deeply impacted me. Like
Same here.
I am seeing my peers hopeless. And I saw a situation that was evil, and it was dark. And I made some decisions out of that moment, for myself, for the way that I was going to live my life. And so I just want to throw out this like glimmer of like, yes, there's stuff that's going on that looks like really dark, and yes, this is a conversation that will probably come up again. But there are some good things that can come out of this too.
Yeah.
And so like one of those things that we now are the survivors. We're the ones who get to walk along the other side of these students from Parkland and from some of these other tragedies. And even as a community, as we're talking about gaming and how gaming influences and impacts and stuff like that, we're the conversation makers with this. And so it's up to you and I and all of you guys out there that are watching, like as you are engaging with kids, like have these conversations. I cannot stress this enough. Have conversation about
Yeah.
this stuff. It's far better to do that than to wish that we had in the Zero Hour.
Yeah. It's so interesting they mentioned the thing about Columbine, because it really did rattle everybody, didn't it? There was, at the time, this book that I had read. It was called Give a Boy a Gun. It was one of the first books I had ever read in one night. It was a short book, but it was after Columbine, and I read this thing, and it was essentially about this boy who was bullied and just how he kind of transitioned to wanting to do something terrible. And you know what struck me about that? When you got to the end of it, there was a list of like all the school shootings that had happened since like the mid 1970s, and there were so many, so many. So I mean, lots of people are affected by this. It really is on us to be able to, like you said, to go forward with that. But the personal part for me here is the media is exploiting the situation for ratings, is what they're doing. Because the reality of school shootings in the United States is that it happens way more often than gets reported. Way more often than gets reported. And yet, what we see are these big, terrible things like Parkland, that go and they stay in the media, and it's getting the attention there that needs to be there. But that personal element for me is it doesn't have to be 17 kids that have died to be on the news. One is too much, and it's just such a heartbreaking thing, the whole thing. And as a culture, like, we have to find solutions. Like why is this happening? And if it's a level of guns being out there, well, fine, then that's a discussion that needs to happen without all of the politicization that occurs with that, But I don't know. It's getting to me a little bit to talk about this, but when I hear things now about these silly solutions, like giving teachers guns or things that they really are silly, or you hear about Congress when they have the opportunity to take something up and have a rich conversation about it. They don't want to do it because of lobbying dollars that they're getting from the NRA or whoever. It's a very disappointing thing that highlights the fact that it's not going to come from legislation. Like, the solutions aren't going to come. They're going to come from family. I really believe that. And if it's fatherlessness, that's one thing. If it's something else, then it'll be that. But I think for our part, Damien, like I would imagine we're going to be similar. But for me, what it's going to come down to is just trying to love the kids that are in my life. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's what it's about. I've thought for a long time, as a teacher, if I don't teach those kids a thing, and I will teach them, don't get me wrong, but if I don't teach them a thing, at the end of the day, they should go home happy that they were able to be in school with people that care about them. Yep. Like, that is really what it comes down to. And I hope in some way that's a solution to counteract the very complex issues that cause this, on a personal level.
Yeah. I don't think I could have said it any better myself, man.
Well, we are coming up on the hour here, my friend. I knew we could do this.
Oh, yeah.
When we were talking about, well, can we fill an hour? I'm like, no, we can fill an hour on this. Well, so let's get into, I guess, anything that you want to highlight, Dame, for like content you're working on, things that might be appearing soon.
Sure. I actually just had a video drop for the Far Cry 5 preview event that I was just at down in California last week. So I'm finally able to publicly talk about it, which is a pretty sweet deal. So you can go on over to our YouTube channel, GameSpace.com, in the YouTube search engine, or you can even just go on to GameSpace.com and find the video there. But it was a pretty wild event, complete with supervillain style helicopter entrance from the villain himself, Father Joseph Seed. So it was pretty crazy.
That sounds. I saw the pictures on Facebook. I'm like, Dame's having a good time out there right now. Did they fly you out there, or is this like nearby where you are? Like, how did that work?
So this was actually Ubisoft flew me out. They put me up and fed me and let me go to their event. So it was a pretty sweet deal. I can't complain. Yeah. And
when the time comes for the review, are you doing the review, or is somebody else going to do the review?
I think that is still kind of a discussion that's up in the air. I know there were some people that were pretty hyped about Far Cry 5 before it was even on my radar. So I can neither confirm nor deny that at this point.
That's cool. For my part, I have a video coming out this weekend and an article coming out for a couple really awesome keyboards. It was the ASIO MK Retro Classics.
Nice.
They're just gorgeous. These typewriter style keyboards where in the one it's called Artisan. There's like these copper rings around all of the keys, and it's actual leather underneath the keycaps.
Oh,
And I had mentioned to you in Slack earlier though. I did the whole video on this, right? The whole video on it. I go and I watch it today. I had been saying the name of one of the keyboards wrong the entire time, so I have to go back and redo the whole review on it. But it's not a big deal because like they're really cool. There's a lot to talk about with them. And man, what showpiece keyboards for sure. The other thing that I want to point people to is PCPerspective.com. It's the PC Perspective website. I've done a handful of reviews for them now. I just submitted one for the K68 keyboard from Corsair, which is pretty cool. I had a keyboard and mouse thing for Logitech, and that I'm kind of becoming like a keyboard guy over there.
I was about to ask when you were going to set up the throne of keyboards over there.
Well, so here's the thing. Like, this team they have are so darn smart. Like, the testing that they do is so in-depth, where I emailed the owner of the site, and I told him, I was like, I would love to do more. I was like, I got to be honest, though, I'm a little intimidated by the team that you have, that I'm not going to do what you guys are doing justice. And, they've been very gracious about giving me opportunities, and it's a really cool thing. And, hey, on Monday at MMORPG.com, I'm reviewing Acer's mixed reality headset, which is pretty nice, actually. So
nice. I look forward to that.
Yeah, lots of hardware stuff. Where can we find you, Dame, on the internet?
You can find me at Pastor Dame on Twitter, and that's pretty much it.
Well, we just heard from
we just heard from our producer
that we have 8 minutes left to fill. I'm tempted to ask. Well, all right, so we'll go through the news. All right. Let's see. Oh, here's one. This was an interesting thing this week. The ESRB is going to be labeling game purchases in the most silly action they possibly could have. So, like, everyone's upset about loot boxes, right?
Sure. Yep.
Well, what people wanted was some disclosure that there could be potentially addicting or very costly things in games. So the ESRB is like, oh, hey, we've been studying that. We're just going to put this thing on the box now that says there's online purchases in the game. What?
I mean, on one side of the coin, I can understand it because, like, well, it's kind of like with Star Wars Battlefront 2, and I know that like there have been loot boxes before Battlefront, but I mean that was kind of one of the big things that that people caught on to, and that was a little bit of a game breaker. Was, hey, this thing is riddled with these microtransactions that are game breaking. So yeah, I mean, having a little bit of a heads up for that might be nice, but like, how do you write on a game box that this game has loot boxes, but it's only cosmetic items within the loot box?
I don't know, but I could saying there's online purchases probably isn't it, because that means everything. What's going to happen is they're going to stick this on every game that's out there now, and it's going to lose all meaning. It's still not going to inform people, because every game lets you buy something, whether it's a microtransaction or a season pass, or I mean, that's just been the thing. So like, this is the ESRB taking action while actually not changing anything at all, in my opinion.
I think they got a nifty new logo out of it, though.
Well, as long as they got a logo, that's fine. I wonder what's going to happen, though, because the ESRB is doing this, but there was some like legislation that was going through. And I know the games industry wants to rely on regulatory bodies like the ESRB, but since this really doesn't accomplish anything, it makes me wonder if we're actually going to be seeing like legislation come through anyways. Or maybe they'll just take it and the politicians will let it drop, because I don't think they really want to do anything anyways. But.
No, I see. I'm one of those people that like, and this is where like my views expressed here may not be the same views as expressed by GameSpace.com, MMORPG.com, or reflect any of the views of our streamers. But I don't think the government should have a hand in that. I mean, like, it's just like one other thing to screw up.
Right? Yeah.
just leave. That's all. Just leave my video games alone. Yeah, you can give us warnings, or you can at least give us. I like the ERSB from the standpoint of understanding what content is within the game and why a game is rated what it is. But when you start putting into effect like actual legislation or when you start putting into effect like controllers on what kind of access or what kind of access people can have to games, I mean, like that's where it gets into the really weird territory.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that it just sees this as. I think they're kind of just doing it for constituent brownie points.
Well,
Honestly.
well,
So,
I
I
think
mean,
this. I think this kind of wraps into our initial conversation here about violence in video games. Honestly, like I think this is all emotive responses. It's all emotive responses to the things that are going on in the industry in the last couple of months. And I think that it's one of those things that everybody's up in arms. So like, okay, rah, 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 we're going to do something. And then it goes nowhere. Or that just the wrong decision is made.
well, speaking of violent video games, Turok is coming back. I guess. Did you play Turok?
I grew up with a kid that was obsessed with Turok, but
Dude,
I
I
never
love
really
Turok.
got into it myself.
Dinosaurs, man. When I was growing up, we had the Nintendo 64, and we would play Turok, and you would get the cheat codes, and you would go right to the last level, and it was like a half robot Tyrannosaurus Rex with a laser shooting out of its eye.
What?
And the whole thing, it was like. Trying to remember how it was, but I remember you'd have to go through like this like sci-fi like tunnel, like you're going through like the Borg, like the Borg, right, from Star
Yes,
Trek.
absolutely.
Like so they'd have the cube, the mechanized cube. So you're going through this like science fiction like mechanized tunnel, and you come out on a flippin' Tyrannosaurus Rex with a laser eye. But man, talk about a violent game. When I was a kid,
Yeah.
like that was a violent game.
See, like hearing you describe that, like I half expect Dr. Evil to be on the other side of that and be like, I've got a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a freaking laser beam in my eye.
I wonder with this game though, because like if they're going to do a remaster, like that's cool. Don't get me wrong. If it will play, because man, games that seemed really great back in the day, some of them really just do not hold up anymore.
I
Like
have
in
this-
particular, shooters on the Nintendo 64.
Oh, no kidding.
Do you remember the controller? How like
Absolutely.
the little yellow arrows you'd have to use to like turn your gun and stuff. At the time,
How are
it
you
was like,
supposed
oh,
to
this is
hold
awesome.
that thing?
Like this, right? Like it was the wing thing.
Recently, I had a games night with a couple of guys that we busted out an old N64, and we busted out GoldenEye, and it was atrocious, man. It was so bad.
Have you
So
played
bad.
the GoldenEye that was made on PC though?
I did not.
It's not the actual GoldenEye game. It was somebody had taken GoldenEye 64 and updated it with like new visuals and like mouse and keyboard compatibility. It was actually really good.
Okay.
It was like made in the Source engine, I think.
Okay. Well,
I
that
guess
sounds
they'll-
that sounds fantastic. I would love to see them do that with Perfect Dark, though.
I don't know how I missed that game. I remember the cover.
Really?
Dark, yeah. Or Jet Force
Oh.
Gemini. That was my jam.
Okay.
The
I played Jet Force Gemini. I had my college roommate had Perfect Dark and Jet Force Gemini, and we played through both of those together. So yeah, that was definitely a good time. But again, like those are games where I'm like, I'm not sure like how they would
Yeah.
hold up. We're so jaded as gamers, having gone through that.
Yeah, we really are. So Steven is in our ears. Did anybody did they hear that, Steven?
I
Or
don't
is that
think
just us?
I don't think they do.
Okay.
He's just messing with us.
So we have a producer that's in our ears on this one, and he says we have 1 minute left, and Jet Force Gemini had terrible controls. You know what it also had? The enemies were horrific. Have you ever considered what a nightmare world it would be if like aliens were like huge ants? Stephen King's not his last book, but he had a book called Revival that was all about how horrific giant ants would be. That game is. I'm just saying. Like this is one of those things. All right, with that, everybody, thank you for listening. Be sure to check back here again next Friday for the GameSpace Game Show. Check us out at mmorpg.com and gamespace.com. And with that,
and don't die by giant ants.
Don't die by giant ants.